Tasmina Rahman, the Managing Director of Grameen Trust, who will share very interesting updates alongside Emmanuel de Merode, the Director of Virunga National Park, who's joining us online. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Lamia Morshed, Tasmina Rahman, and Emmanuel.
Sadia is here.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Can you hear us, Emmanuel?
I can, yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So this is a very special segment that we wanted to introduce, Tasmina and I, because we met Emmanuel last April at the Social Business Forum that we organized in Kenya. And there was an instant chemistry between Emmanuel and Professor Yunus, because they're both concerned about exactly the same things, which is, I guess, net zero poverty, zero poverty and zero net carbon emissions, primarily, I would say. Emmanuel is working in the Congo Basin, which, as we know, is alongside the Amazon and the Indonesian tropical forest, one of the three lungs of the earth. So the oxygen that we all breathe around the world come from these three major lungs of the planet. And Emmanuel has been dedicated to working to preserve the Congolese forest. And I'm going to just read out a short introduction about him. Just one second. Huh? So Emmanuel de Merode was born in North Africa and spent his childhood in Kenya. He arrived in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1993, and in 2008 was appointed Director and Chief Warden of Virunga National Park in the Eastern Congo, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and Africa's oldest national park. The park is famous as a last refuge for the mountain gorillas, which I believe Emmanuel helps work to protect, but also lies at the heart of a region that has suffered 30 years of armed conflict. Over the past 15 years, Emmanuel has overseen the work of the Virunga Alliance, an ambitious development program designed to foster peace and prosperity through the responsible economic development of the park's natural resources. Through the combination of electrification and financial services, over 21,000 jobs have been created in the local community, of which over 2,000 are estimated to be young men and women who have left the armed groups to reintegrate into their communities, offering a unique approach to environment protection and peace building. So in April, when Emmanuel met Professor Yunus, he came with a proposal of seeing whether they could work together to introduce microcredit for the communities in Congo, where he works. And I'm going to just hand over to Tasmina from Grameen Trust, whose organization is working directly with Emmanuel, to talk a little bit about the collaboration.
Thank you, Lamiapa. Good morning, Emmanuel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Grameen Trust, actually, at the invitation of Virunga Foundation, conducted a feasibility study in August 2023. And according to the feasibility report, there is a great prospect to start Grameen replication program in Goma, Congo. So for this purpose, a new entity, Grameen Virunga, is already registered as a microfinance entity, and they are now waiting for receiving credit license. As soon as credit license is received, we will send Grameen expert to Congo to start the Grameen replication program there, to raise the Grameen flag over Goma. So, yes, and we are we hope that we are very excited, Grameen Trust is very excited to start the 156th Grameen replication program in Goma. And now we invite Prince Emmanuel to share the glimpses of Virunga Foundation as well as Grameen Virunga. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome.
Well, Thank you ever so much. I feel very honoured to be here, and also very sad not to have been able to make it. Unfortunately, our situation in Virunga has been very difficult of late, which makes it difficult for us to travel. But really, what I was hoping to share with you this evening was in as succinct a way as possible the last 30 years of our story in Eastern Congo, and really this moment last year when this partnership was born with Grameen, and to really explain why it's such an important moment for us in terms of our overall objectives of what we're trying to achieve in Eastern Congo. So, of course, many of you will know that the region that we live in has a very tragic history. We're currently in our 5th civil war over the last 30 years. And over that period, over 8 million Congolese people have been killed, 8 million people who should not have died in that way. And it's really that reality that shapes everything we do. It's really the governing value behind all of our work. But at the same time, we're a national park. We're the oldest national park in Africa, with a national park that contains within its boundaries over 50% of every terrestrial species on the African continent. It also includes some extraordinary species like the 3 taxa, the 3 types of great apes, the gorillas, the mountain gorillas, lowland gorillas, and chimpanzees, which also give it an incredible potential, an economic potential in terms of tourism development in the region. But of course, the dominant reality is that we're a region of armed conflict, and this all began 30 years ago with the tragic events in the neighboring country of Rwanda, which suffered a horrific genocide, whose effects spilt over into Eastern Congo and precipitated a series of civil wars and periods of chronic violence. And those consequences we're still living with today. Part of those consequences has been the destruction of those resources that we work to protect. And in particular, the mountain gorillas were very, very badly affected. In 2007, there were a series of killings, and that affected all of the species across the park. On top of that, this period of armed conflict had a terrible impact on our own staff, on our own team. We're a team predominantly of Congolese young men and women who have never ceased to continue the work of protecting these extraordinary resources for the future of Congo. But of those 680 men and women, 211 have been killed over that period. It was estimated that when you join the service of managing Virunga National Park as a ranger, you have a 37% chance of dying of a violent death before the end of your career. And so this marks it as one of the most difficult services, public services, to belong to in the world. And of course, when you suffer that level of tragedy, you have an obligation and a responsibility to understand the underlying reasons, the deep-rooted causes of that violence. And if we are to stand any chance of establishing a future for Virunga National Park, we have to understand this terrible violence that affects the people of Eastern Congo. And one of the things that really helped us to understand the dynamics of violence around the park was this picture, which was taken by a friend many years ago, and which really explains some of the difficulties that we're faced with. And this is the picture of a group of victims, a group of women who are pleading to access the national park for fuel wood. And of course, fuel wood isn't just a question of enriching yourself, cutting the forest down to make money. For these women, it's really a question of survival in terms of being able to cook, but even more importantly, to be able to sterilize water by boiling it. And of course, it's a region that's deeply affected by waterborne diseases. And so it's not an option for them. They have to access the park's forests for fuel. And what we came to realize was actually the earlier picture that I showed you of the gorillas being killed is deeply tied to this problem. The militias were going into the park and killing the gorillas, not because they want the meat or the baby gorillas to traffic, but because they want to kill the very reason why rangers are protecting the forest, which are the gorillas. And actually, it's not the gorillas they want, it's access to the forest. And by killing the gorillas, the rangers will cease to protect the forest. And so that for us was really the first severe wake-up call that actually we were never going to successfully protect Virunga by protecting the wildlife. We had to engage with the community and find solutions to these much deeper problems that are tied to the livelihoods, to the health, to the welfare of the community, and find a way of building trust with that community through economic engagement on these critical issues. And so we started looking at it from a much wider perspective and really discovered that these problems were fundamental. There have been 5 civil wars in Eastern Congo that have killed 8 million people. Every single one of those wars has started in or around Virunga National Park. So Virunga is not, the key issue in Virunga is not about wildlife and biodiversity. It's about the dynamics of armed conflict and the consequences of that. That's the real issue. And so, we quickly discovered that fuel wood from the park had an economic value of what was then about $40 million a year. It's now reached about 90 million. The illegal fishing on the lake in the middle of the park, Lake Edward, one of the most productive lakes in the world, was at 62 million. And then there were other illegal forms of natural resource extraction, such as illegal oil that was developing in the national park. All of these resources together are worth about $170 million. If they're extracted illegally, they're enough to finance private armies, illegal armed groups. They're enough to finance wars. And that's really where you find the heart of the problem that we're confronted with in Eastern Congo. And in fact, when you look at the reports of the UN group of experts on the situation in Eastern Congo, every single one of those reports, and there are over 20 of them, refer to the illegal exploitation of natural resources as the underlying cause of violence and armed conflict. And so what we had to do was to find not so much a way of policing that wasn't going to work. We knew it wasn't going to work. We needed an economic alternative. And that was the only way of engaging with the community, getting the communities on the side of the park. And when I say communities, I mean that in a very large sense. 11 million people living within a day's walk of the park's boundary. And actually what we found were that there were enormous resources that could be exploited and create benefits for the community in a way that's even greater than what the trafficking was producing in terms of wealth, and that could be exploited sustainably in a non-damaging way to the environment. And these are, of course, the fact that it's a mountainous park with high rainfall, so very high energy rivers that can be converted into electricity, and then the possibility of relying on an incredible entrepreneurial spirit around the park to convert all of that energy into enterprise, into agricultural transformation. But what was missing was really the ability to combine the provision of cheap energy for a new form of industry with financial services. The two basic ingredients to really drive industrialization, to drive economic renewal in this very marginalized part of the African continent. And so about 15 years ago, we gave ourselves some very ambitious objectives to look at the national park. The national park is 2 million acres of land. That is incredibly fertile agricultural land and has been converted to, it's been preserved as natural land rather than being converted to agriculture. And whilst that is extraordinary for the global community, for the whole of humanity, in terms of preserving biodiversity, which is something we all care about, it also has a cost. And that cost is being borne by the people on Earth who can least afford it, people living in extreme poverty around the national park. And that cost can be quantified very easily. 2 million acres of land, a family in Eastern Congo, a rural family, will make $700 or $800 a year per acre, times 2 million acres. You're talking about over $1 billion of lost revenue for some of the poorest people on Earth, so that the rest of us can benefit, can enjoy the continued existence of the mountain gorillas and all the rest of the wildlife. So we're faced with an incredible dilemma there, and we need an instrument that can generate $1 billion a year for the poorest communities on Earth. And so contingent on reaching those objectives is the ability to create employment. And so about 15 years ago, we came to realize that those were the targets that we had to set ourselves if this national park were to continue to exist. And so embarked on an incredibly ambitious energy program. We trained up Congolese engineers, Congolese business operators to build an extraordinary company that was converting all of the park's energy from its rivers that were kept steady, kept stable because of the preservation of the forests into electricity, and then through that electricity to start to embark on the whole process of enterprise building. And so we worked on a model which initially we thought we could do on our own, which was a model to provide microloans to small businesses that are linked to the kilowatt hour. It uses essentially the unit of energy from the park almost as a currency. And as micro businesses use that kilowatt hour as a currency, and it can be increased in cost to cover the reimbursement of a microloan, you're able to overcome some of the biggest barriers to financial inclusion, which are, of course, the whole issue of people living in extreme poverty, not by definition, not owning anything and therefore cannot provide collateral on the one hand, but also the incredibly high marginal cost of due diligence on new loans. If you're asking for a $200 loan and the due diligence of a bank is going to cost you $1,000, they won't let you through the door at the bank. So these are things I obviously don't need to explain to you, but for us it was all new. And so we were able to develop this model where we were using the smart meter of an electricity grid offered to a micro business as not just a source of energy, but also a source of finance, of investment. And it was very successful, except that we were never able to reach the poorest of the poor because they cannot afford even the cost of a smart meter. And so that's really where our approach had its limitations, and we weren't able to do the very thing that we were trying to do, which was to bring the benefits of an extraordinary ecosystem to the very poorest of the people living around Virunga. And so that's really what made this incredible meeting for me with Professor Yunus and his team was this sudden understanding that actually, if you combine the Grameen model of social collateral and peer groups accessing credit with ecosystem services provided through electricity, we could overcome that fundamental barrier and reach the entire population. And so that's where we're at. For all the difficulties, and these last 2 years have been particularly difficult. 13 of our staff have been killed in our efforts to try and keep this program going. We are nonetheless incredibly optimistic about the ability to reach those objectives of creating 100,000 jobs, of contributing over $1 billion a year to the local economy, a GDP impact of over $1 billion a year, and through that, really making a contribution to this extraordinary story that is Grameen's, and that is now spreading across the world, even to areas as remote as where we live. And so, although I really feel for all the challenges that Grameen themselves are experiencing, in particular in Bangladesh, we really do hope that we can realize this as an overall vindication that for the poorest people on earth, Grameen, in developing these partnerships, is one of the most wonderful approaches to poverty reduction, but also to the reduction of conflict and violence in some of these very, very difficult areas. So I wanted to just finish on a word of thanks for this partnership that we have with you. It really has made a big difference on how we view the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you. I just wanted to add one last thing. The story of Virunga is actually a film on Netflix. People can find out the whole story about the program that he's running in Congo. And we wanted to also mention that Emmanuel is actually a prince from Belgium who's very committed to these issues, and that he actually survived an assassination attempt in trying to do this work to protect the forest and to protect the communities. And we're very excited from Grameen Trust and from the Yunus Center to be collaborating with him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have my microphone? Oh, yes, awesome. Also, Virunga National Park is a park that you must visit when you're there, so hopefully you'll also get to trek with the mountain gorillas one day. Thank you so much for that presentation, for both Emmanuel, Lamiapu, and Tasminapu to come up on stage. Before I pass it, so tomorrow on the June 29th, we have two very exciting events coming up, but they will be held at the Asia Pacific College in Makati City. The Academia Dialogue will start at 9 a.m. and will go on until 3 p.m., which will be followed by the 3-0 Club Convention from 4:30 to 7:15 p.m. It's a full day. I hope you all join us. And if you want transport support, there will be two coasters that leave from Brittany Hotel at 8 a.m. and then at 8:20 a.m. So if you are interested to tag along, please report at the venue before 8 a.m. Thank you very much. With that, that is my closure. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I will pass it to my friend Erica for the 7th plenary session.
Thanks, Adia. So it seems like only yesterday when we started SBD 2024, and now we're entering our final panel. I know at this point, some of you might be asking, so what's next? After everything we've heard, we've learned, what is next? For our final plenary, we now look to the future with a session, The Journey Ahead, Future Directions for Social Business Movement. For this session, may we ask Professor Mohammed Ibrahim, trustee of the UNIS Center, to join us on stage and help facilitate this conversation with our esteemed panel. Our speakers include Professor Mohammed Yunus.